Well, here we go again. Hello folks, this is Lyaj, and today we are going to be talking about the brand new trailer for Monster Hunter Wilds. A bit over a week after we got our first major trailer for Wilds at the PlayStation Showcase, Capcom has gone ahead and given us a bonus drop at the Summer Games Fest. So now we have yet another trailer that is most definitely full of brand new information for us to glean about the game. Well, more so you perceptive folks in the community will be doing all the gleaning. All I'm gonna be doing is watching this trailer and pausing a bunch of times. Yeah, I seem to have been quite off the mark in a few aspects with my last trailer analysis, which wasn't helped by the fact that I was a couple days late releasing my analysis, so people already had most of the details worked out while I was full head down just trying to get my video finished. But fair enough, I'm not really a pro at this whole video making thing, so I think I'll just focus on putting together my own thoughts just to provide another perspective as part of the community. If I get things wrong, I'll probably be made aware of it pretty soon. But without further ado, I will be doing my best to break this new trailer down. And I might have made this blatantly false statement at the start of my previous video, but I'm going to attempt to say it again. I do think that this trailer won't have quite as much content for me to break down, so this will hopefully be a shorter video. At the very least, I feel like I can say this with more confidence because after watching the trailer a few times, it seems that there aren't too many details that weren't already covered in the last trailer. So well, let's go ahead and start this trailer up, and I'll see you on the other side. Now, our very first shot here actually seems to be a continuation of the initial story cutscene we watched in the first trailer. As we remember, this scene was cut off right as one of our characters, Nata, spotted something directly in front of our sand ship. And now, we know exactly what it is that was spotted. Swimming around in a massive cloud of dust, we are given our first major look at a new species of monster. These are the leviathans known as the Bahara. Maybe Bahara? And they've got quite an interesting design. I love how they move in these corkscrew patterns, which paired with the bumpy scales on their body and the crazy pronged mouths they've got, makes them look like these weird drills / tunnel boring machines. Definitely an awesome take on a sort of sandworm archetype. And of course, as the most perceptive community members noticed, we could actually spot this monster in the first trailer. In this scene where a handful of Doshaguma have suddenly found themselves in a sinkhole, out of the 4 bodies we can spot, we can now easily see that this one to the bottom has those same bumpy scales and is moving in the same corkscrew pattern. In addition, in the next scene, it just so happens that the monster that the Alpha Doshaguma was tangling with was one of the Bahara. I will say that this did catch my eye when I first saw it, but I didn't even really consider that it was a new monster. When the Alpha ends up chucking the monster at the Hunter upon seeing it land on its back, I just assumed that it was one of the Karatanoth or the Lightning Pangolins. But there we go, we have been introduced to a really cool new monster, and this one will end up being the star of this trailer. Let's go ahead and dive into it.
Over there!
We are now following our Hunter. In this trailer, our Hunter has been swapped to a female character, so we will get an opportunity to hear her voice acting in the upcoming scenes. And the most important development in this scene is that it sounds like our newly talking cat will in fact be interjecting yas into their dialogue. This is good, I think. Now we cut to a distant shot of Bahara going absolutely swarm crazy on a fellow riding a Sacred, and we then get this really sweet cinematic dodge that gives us another good look at the features of the monster.
Why are you here?
You can't do this alone!
Our Hunter then joins up with this person who seems to be a new character whom we have not yet been introduced to. Upon checking the website, there doesn't seem to be any information about this guy right now, although that could very well change by the time I get this video out. But as wrong as I will probably end up being, I have a few thoughts about this character's role. In my first watch of the trailer, I thought that this guy was a fellow Hunter, but on closer inspection, that's probably not the case. Looking at this guy's gear, we can see that he is carrying some sort of spear-like implement, but I have to say that that ain't a monster hunting weapon. We all know what kind of gear is required to do what a hunter does. Instead, an idea that I have is that this guy could potentially be a local to this particular area. Although we know that our hunter is being tasked with exploring these supposedly uncharted forbidden lands, we will see later that in this trailer that there seems to be a village that was here already. And another thing we know is that this game is the first time we are meeting our new mount monster, the Secret. So it could just be that the Secret is a monster native to the Forbidden Lands, and maybe their usage as mounts is something pioneered by the people living there. In that case, maybe this new character is someone who possibly serves as a guide, helping teach the members of the Research Commission about the mounts and possibly providing info about the lay of the land and the local wildlife. At any rate, we are in a bit of a situation at the moment.
We need to shake them off! Follow me! Jump! Here it comes!
There's too many of them!
Watch out for that glove! I will draw a tire!
So it seems we now have ourselves a bit of a playable story moment where we will be attempting to flee this huge swarm of Bahara. I mentioned in my last video that I was curious if these story moments would be more integrated into the gameplay as opposed to having the usual hunt quests with story cutscenes in between them. This does feel like a slightly more involved sequence that isn't straight up hunting, and I do think stuff like this would help in making the story more compelling. I do, however, still need to throw in the disclaimer that, as always, the hunting action should still take priority. And these sort of set-piece moments might be pretty cool, sprinkled over the few dozen hours of gameplay needed to get through the story, but we will definitely want there to still be a solid hunting gameplay loop to keep the dedicated players entertained for a long time after that. Let's now talk a bit more about this sequence in detail though, because I do think that it is pretty dang cool. Coming from the past Monster Hunter games, seeing this number of larger monsters all behaving as a herd is quite impressive. What catches my eye specifically is the level of variety in the behaviors of this monster. Instead of just moving as a single pack, the Bahara employ a few different tactics to try to take us down. Being able to drill through the sand pretty fast, the monsters are able to flank us from multiple sides, and at this point they are able to harass us by spitting up some glop, as well as attempting to pounce on us.
Cover me!
You got it. Be careful.
Be ready!
Next up, we can observe a bit more mounted combat. First, our hunter does a quick swing with her greatsword, which is the first bit of mounted melee combat we have seen so far, excluding the dismounting greatsword attack from the last trailer. We will of course still need to wait and see how extensive a moveset the different weapons will have access to while mounted. Like for example, if this mounted greatsword attack could be charged, imagine being able to do drive-by charge attacks. Depending on what mounted movesets the different weapons will have, it could be possible that a significant portion of hunts could be done from the back of a mount. Moving forward a little bit, our hunter swaps to her heavy bowgun, which is a new feature first introduced in the last trailer. In this snippet, take note of our mount's speed as the bowgun is being fired. As we can see, our speed didn't really change at all. This actually sheds some light on a thought that I had after watching the last trailer. When we look at this clip where the hunter is first firing the bowgun while mounted, the mount seemed to have slowed down considerably. But as this footage suggests, it seems to be possible to fire a bowgun without really having to slow down at all. Now, there could be some additional nuance to this that we just aren't aware of. Like maybe if we want to aim more precisely, we will need to slow down much more. That sort of seems to make sense. In this clip, it could be that we are more so laying down cover fire instead of shooting for maximum damage output. By the way, I noticed an interesting little quirk in the hunter's behavior as they are shooting in this scene that might suggest a change to how bowguns could control. Look at this volley of shots that the hunter fires. For the first shot, our hunter is aiming at the Bahara directly to the left. The shot seems to hit this one, as we can see it reel back shortly after. But for the remaining two shots, our hunter's aim almost seems to snap directly to the front left Bahara. This could suggest a sort of lock-on behavior for using ranged weapons while mounted. We have of course had the target camera feature in the past Monster Hunter games, but this definitely looks like a case of the bowgun being aimed independently of the camera. And this would actually make quite a bit of sense, as aiming a ranged weapon while mounted, especially when playing with a controller, would be quite an ordeal. And maybe, as I just speculated earlier, we could swap to a manual aim by slowing down our mount. I'm sure this would be critical to do things such as targeting weak spots, which is pretty important for maintaining good DPS with ranged weapons.
We can make it to the rocks, we may lose them!
Okay, continuing on, we can now see the Bahara's sinkhole making capabilities on full display. This is of course reminiscent of the sinkhole triggered by the Diablos back in Monster Hunter World's Wildspire Wastes. The main aspect that I am curious about when it comes to this behavior is if it would only be possible in scripted areas or if it is just something that could happen at any point when you are dealing with these monsters. Because an interesting part comes next in this trailer.
As I feared, it picked up our scent!
I'll handle it. You find someplace safe.
Thank you!
After plunging into the sinkhole, this following scene transition seems to imply that we were transported to a cave underneath the desert. And this is once again akin to how the Wildspire Waste sinkhole works, but what I'm wondering is if you could be dropped through a sinkhole in any number of places on the surface and wind up in a corresponding area underground. I think this would be a really interesting dynamic as opposed to having a very obvious spot that could become a sinkhole. At any rate, in a similar manner to the first trailer, we have now ended up with a face-off against just a single monster, so it is time for some one-on-one hunting action. It is at this point that I would like to bring up a bit of a general game discussion topic that I talked about in my reveal trailer analysis. In both this trailer and the previous one, the majority of the hunting action has been in one-on-one fights. In contrast, when these large monsters were in big packs, the focus was instead on either fleeing or attempting to split the monsters up. Now, I didn't address this in the last video, but the official website does have a little section about monster herds. At the time, I figured this was self-explanatory, but I am now noticing that I didn't really read the text that closely. As this first line says, in the Forbidden Lands you'll encounter not only herds of small monsters, some of the large monsters of the region may also form packs. Note this key term, some of the large monsters. This heavily implies that every member of these large monster packs, of which we now have two examples, the Doshagama and the Bahara, is to be considered a large monster. Now that said, we also, in the case of the Doshagama, saw that there was at least one individual that seemed to be a bit tougher than the rest. So the question is, do each of the pack members boast a large monster HP pool, or would this just be the case for the toughest one in the pack? We threw around the term medium monster to refer to a monster that wouldn't go down in just a few hits like a small monster, but wouldn't have the massive HP pool of a large monster. At this point, I think it is still unclear whether or not each member of the pack will be scaled to large monster levels, but the idea that I am sorta getting is that the game will be encouraging us to fight just a single individual in the pack. In the case of the Doshagama, maybe you'll get the best rewards for taking down the alpha and the other members are just obstacles that aren't worth your time, regardless of how long it actually takes to hunt them. Focusing back on the trailer at hand, the current Bahara doesn't necessarily appear to be a notable individual compared to the others. Well, it's kinda hard to tell, maybe this one is a bit bigger. The best comparison I've got is when we see the hunter directly next to one when swinging her greatsword. This one does seem to be looming over our hunter a bit more, but that's probably not a great metric because this individual is not submerged in sand and is angling its body upwards. To wrap up this monster classification discussion, I suppose we'll just have to wait and see for the full details. But the main theme really does seem to be that we will be encouraged to do whatever we can to separate individual targets from their packs. And one more thought on that, I have to say that I look forward to seeing players doing challenges where they attempt to solo an entire pack. Good luck to all of you. Now let's talk just a bit on this individual Bahara fight. This time, our hunter is fighting primarily with a heavy bowgun. The first thing we can see is our hunter using the heavy bowgun's shield to block the monster roar. Yup, that is just a normal Monster Hunter feature, so nothing out of the ordinary here. We then cut to a shot back on the surface with the Bahara going all snake mode on a piece of the terrain. I always love to see monsters doing contextual actions depending on where they are at, so I hope this game has more than ever. Notably, the Bahara also seems to have a bit of an extra red glow in this shot, so I wonder if this is an enraged state or some form of it powering up. Now, another thing in the scene that caught my eye is that it feels like our hunter is shooting from quite a far distance. Maybe my depth perception is a bit off, but this feels like outside of optimal bowgun range from any past game. Well, maybe it's not actually that far, and it could still be a good range for something like piercing ammo. Or maybe the hunter is just doing a very bad job, but I'm probably reading into this a bit much. Anyways, after blocking some more glop with the shield, we've got another scene with a sinkhole. Compared to the other times we've seen it, this time actually feels like part of the combat encounter instead of being a scripted story moment. This time, we are desperately trying to run out of the sinkhole and we perform a classic Superman dive to avoid the monster's pounce. I wonder if falling to the bottom of this sinkhole in this case would result in us being sucked underground, or if it would instead result in a more lethal outcome. Now for some more mounted combat, and we've got another very cool maneuver here. As we can see, we can even perform a sidestep evade while on our mount. What a good bird. This does further solidify that we might be performing a pretty good amount of combat while mounted. Now, in relation to a thought that I had earlier, I have noticed one more thing in this scene. Note that after dodging the attack, we can see the camera zoom in considerably before our hunter fires off a shot. This might just so happen to be just what I was thinking of, where we can enter a more precise aiming mode while mounted. And in fact, we can see this same camera zoom in the first trailer when the hunter takes aim at the Doshagama. Now, as to whether or not this forces our mount to slow down, it does sort of look like the surroundings are moving a bit slower in this new clip, but it's hard to tell for sure. It could just have to do with the camera perspective. So next up, we have a turf war interaction between a Doshagama and a few of the Bahara. This shouldn't be too groundbreaking at this point, but it's still cool to see. And now here is a nice shot of the mysterious ring structure glowing very ominously in the middle of a thunderstorm. There has been a bit of speculation on what exactly this glow is, whether or not it's due to some ancient power or perhaps the intervention of an elder dragon, and whether or not it is influencing the violent thunderstorms in the area. Well, maybe, what if this guy was involved? So here we have it, the reveal of a brand new monster. The first thing we can see is the monster placing its two wings on the ground as if they were arms. This particular body structure immediately reminds me of Gore and Shigaru Magala, as this species is capable of rotating its wings forward and placing them on the ground like a set of forearms. However, after re-watching this a few more times, I have noticed that this monster only has 2 legs. This could possibly put it in the Flying Wyvern classification, as a quote, true Elder Dragon will have 4 legs and 2 wings. So perhaps this monster's body structure could then be more akin to that of a Tigrex or Nargacuga, the unofficially dubbed pseudo-wyverns that primarily walk on 4 limbs but also happen to have wings on their front legs. Do note, however, that the classification for an Elder Dragon has always been on an arbitrary basis. While a handful of Elder Dragons do have the actual dragon body structure, any other monster can be deemed an Elder Dragon if it is considered to be a big enough threat. Fun fact, despite being a juvenile Elder Dragon, the Gormagala still has the classification of question marks, which keeps it out of the Elder Dragon class, and, funnily enough, gives the game justification for allowing it to be captured in a trap. Anyways, in this next shot, when we see this monster in flight, its wingspan seems far more impressive than the pseudo-wyverns, so this is actually quite a unique design from a monster skeleton perspective. Now, the other most striking feature of this monster is whatever is going on with its head. First, we will notice these electrified spikes that protrude from its neck. Most definitely these are necessary for the monster to use some huge electrical attacks. The actual head of this monster is pretty crazy looking. I originally thought that this monster's head had this crazy split down the middle design, but I actually think this is just a big pair of horns. If we rewind a bit, we can actually spot this monster's mouth and it looks kinda normal. I think my actual favorite part of this design is how, starting at the split in the horns, we can see this path extending all the way down its back that gets filled with electricity. And this almost feels like that the entire monster's body is serving as a railgun, and just look at the impact from this monster's attack in the following scene. That is some serious firepower. I think my working name for this guy will be the Railgun Dragon. Now then, plenty of questions still remain about this monster. Is it the game's flagship? Could it be responsible for the severe lightning storms in this area? Possibly, but of course we don't know for sure. I do have a couple theories, however. First, on the matter of this monster being responsible for the lightning storms, past Monster Hunter games have often had a particular pattern when it came to their stories. Quite often, a big plot point in the story will be the presence of some sort of natural disaster that is shaking up the ecosystem. And so, partway through the story, we will meet the flagship monster of the game, and everyone will assume that that is what was responsible. But also, quite consistently, it will turn out that the flagship monster's activities were more of a side effect of the presence of a true final boss monster, whose identity is usually kept hidden in the game's marketing. So this monster could quite possibly be the game's flagship, but one thing that I would put money on is that there is probably a much more mysterious monster behind whatever is going on in this world. And on that topic, I have one more general theory about this game. So a thing that I discussed in my analysis of the last trailer was a section on the website about changing environments. To summarize this, it basically stated how each hunting locale would feature 2 dynamically changing identities. And my thoughts were basically that we would see a handful of different areas, and each one would have some big natural phenomenon that would drastically change the landscape. Now maybe the Railgun Dragon is responsible for the lightning in the windswept plains, but perhaps there could be a different monster in another area that is changing the environment in a completely different way. Still, I do think that if there is some actual overarching issue going on in the context of the game's story, then some mysterious elder dragon that we have yet to meet will likely be the main culprit. Well, we are nearly done with the trailer at this point, and I don't think there is all that much left for us to break down.
They're in the village!
Don't worry, the hunter is here. Just watch. You'll see what hunting is all about.
We've got this scene in a village that I referenced back at the start of this video, but this part is pretty self-explanatory. Basically, the village is under attack by the Doshagama, and it's up to our hunter to save the day. In the last few shots, the one thing that catches my interest is how our hunter actually grabs and swings a greatsword in an actual cutscene. This could be potentially interesting. If you consider how cutscenes usually go in any game where your character can have multiple weapon types, you will almost never see your character use their weapon in a cutscene. Because of course, if you can equip many types of weapons, there would need to be different animations for the different weapons. Which is why, in the past Monster Hunter games, any action cutscenes would feature our hunter mostly evading and using things like the slinger. It would certainly be quite cool just to see a bespoke cutscene animation that reflects our weapon choice, even just for one scene. But this cutscene could very well be forcing us to have a greatsword, which still seems like the most likely option. Maybe it's close to the start of the game before we can choose a weapon type. And there we go, that will finish up this second trailer. Thankfully, it looks like this video won't be quite as long as the last one, so I hope I can get this edited just a bit quicker. Aside from this trailer, however, we have just a few extra bits of news to cover. So first, quite a huge deal, we have received confirmation that Monster Hunter Wilds will include cross-play between all platforms. This is of course something the community has wanted for quite a while, and since this is also the first time the game will have a simultaneous launch on PC and console, it seems like a no-brainer. The next announcement we've got is that Monster Hunter Wilds will be playable at Gamescom in August. This will probably be our next big source of info for the game, as once people can get their hands on it, a lot of the questions we have will be answered. As always, I am still super excited for this game, and I look forward to seeing more about it in the near future. For now, I guess I'll have to wrap this video up, so thank you very much for watching, and I hope to see you again soon.